Na, President of Mongolia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I wish to extend my heartfelt congratulations to Your Excellency, Mr. Philemon Yang, President of the 79th session of the UNGA. I wish you every success in your important work during this session. Every time when I participate in the General Assembly, I find great pleasure observing this sculpture entitled Consciousness, created by a renowned Mongolian artist and located in the garden of the UN headquarters. This sculpture inspires deep contemplation, reminding us of our responsibilities, awareness, and dignity in the context of humanity's history and our obligations to future generations. This profoundly meaningful work symbolizes the historic moment when countries around the world embraced the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on climate change. During my visit this year, the monument stood solemnly, as if urging us to reflect on the goals and commitments we have made for the future generations. Unfortunately, as we approach the time to assess the implementation of this document, we recognize that our efforts and the progress we have achieved are insufficient. For instance, although we are halfway through the timeline for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, progress on nearly half of the SDG targets remain inadequate, with 35% showing stagnation. In response, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has initiated the Summit for the Future to reassess our realities, revitalize our commitments, and amplify our collective efforts. At the summit held just 2 days ago, we engaged in discussions on policies, objectives, and avenues for cooperation concerning sustainable development, science, technology, innovation, youth, and governance transformation. I'm pleased to note that Mongolia actively participated in the negotiation process for the Pact for the Future Declaration on Future Generations and the Global Digital Compact, all of which were discussed and adopted at the summit. The countries of the world, including our own, must work diligently and cooperate to implement these proposed actions. I'm pleased to see that heads of state, government, and their representatives have wholeheartedly supported these commitments and actions, voicing their positions from this esteemed podium. Distinguished delegates, our lives are rapidly evolving and integrated in this age of technological progress and digital advancement. However, tensions, armed conflicts, and wars continue to escalate in many parts of the world, fueled by geopolitical tensions stemming from prejudice, extreme ideologies, mistrust, misunderstanding, and disrespect. Mongolia believes that strengthening multilateral cooperation based on international law and the UN Charter is essential for ensuring international peace and security. Dialogue, mutual understanding, and trust are the foundations for sustainable and peaceful coexistence. To sustain peace, combat climate change, protect public health, reduce economic inequality, and establish justice, the international community must seek optimal solutions and foster innovative cooperation that address the evolving dynamics of our era. This year, presidential and parliamentary elections took place in over 60 countries, with nearly half of the world population exercising their right to vote, making a year of significant choices. In Mongolia, parliamentary elections were also held, and I would like to highlight that both domestic and foreign observers, as well as international organizations, have commended the elections for being successfully conducted within the legal framework. Mongolia has always considered consistently sought to contribute to the international community's efforts for peace, security, and sustainable development. In this regard, Mongolia has established diplomatic relations with all member states of the United Nations and is dedicated to strengthening and developing friendly relations and cooperation with all countries around the globe. As a nation that consistently pursues to a peaceful, open, independent, and multipolar foreign policy, Mongolia respects the pluralism inherent in the diverse histories, cultures, civilizations, religions, national interests, and development paths of countries around the world. We strive to develop international relations based on multipolar principles. Therefore, my country upholds the principles of the UN Charter, particularly the commitment to refrain from using force against the territorial integrity and political independence of any state. In addressing disagreement and conflicts, we call upon countries and nations around the world to prioritize diplomatic dialogue over confrontation, promote unity over hostility, and pursue collective goals rather than divisiveness in order to consistently cooperate in strengthening international peace and security. As Mongols, we have a rich history of valuing and seeking amicable solutions through dialogue. For centuries, Great Mongol Empire engaged through political and diplomatic means in its relations with neighboring, distant, allied, and adversarial nations. This included sending and receiving envoys and ambassadors, concluding agreements, fostering friendship, and negotiating, which are the practices that remain as the cornerstone of Mongolia's current foreign policy. The Gerege serves as a historical evidence of this legacy. It represents the origins of credentials handed to envoys or modern diplomatic passports, having been used by Mongols since the 13th century in their relationship with other nations. The Gerege is displayed as a historic artifact at the United Nations headquarters. In 2000, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan remarked that Gerege is an invaluable heritage gifted by Mongols to the international community, emphasizing that we have a lot to learn from the wisdom of Mongolian ancestors. The principles of maintaining peace and harmonious coexistence championed by our ancestors reflects the progressive ideals that underpin our current collective efforts to sustain peace and stability. At present, humanity is alarmed by the deepening global geopolitical tensions which ignite the fires of war and heighten the nuclear threat. The collective efforts of countries around the world towards non-proliferation, disarmament, and the total elimination of nuclear weapons, as well as the expansion of nuclear weapon-free zones, must not be overlooked. Mongolia has made significant contributions to the elimination of nuclear threats by having its nuclear weapon-free status recognized at the international level. We reaffirm our commitment to continue pursuing and supporting nuclear weapon-free policies and initiatives. Mongolia calls upon all countries to collaborate in ensuring peace and stability, particularly in creating a world free from nuclear threats. We propose the convening of a special gathering on this issue within the framework of the United Nations. Mr. President, Mongolia deeply appreciates the role of UN peacekeepers, the Blue Helmets, who serve tirelessly and make significant contributions to international peace and security. Due to various factors, such as international terrorism, brutal acts of extremism, and the growing number of refugees, Blue Helmets are confronted with increasingly complex tasks under more challenging conditions. We must not forget that over 4,370 UN peacekeepers, including military, police, and civilian personnel, have lost their lives in the line of duty. Although Mongolia has a relatively small population, over the past 20 years, more than 20,000 peacekeepers have been deployed to hotspots around the world to contribute to peace and security of humanity. In particular, in alignment with the Women, Peace and Security agenda of the UN Security Council, we aim to increase women participation in UN peacekeeping operations. Currently, Mongolian female officers made up to 11% of our peacekeepers. To ensure the competence of our peacekeepers, it is crucial to improve their psychological well-being. Therefore, Mongolia initiated and developed a pilot project for supporting peacekeepers and their families, which was submitted to the UNTPKO, Mr. President, and distinguished delegates. In recent years, the rapid development of information and communication technologies has significantly impacted the daily life of people, and is seen as a factor that may fundamentally reshape the development of civilization in the future. In line with these intensive discussions on information and communication technologies and artificial intelligence have arisen in the international fora, and the recently adopted Global Digital Compact is a timely and essential step. Our country aims to keep pace with the development of information technology, placing great importance on UN resolutions, documents, and other international legal frameworks related to this issue, and keenly participating in their discussions. In March of this year, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution calling on member states to ensure the reliability and security of artificial intelligence for the first time, which is a significant step forward to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Countries around the world are focusing on policies that promote economic diversification, energy and digital transitions, reduce the negative impacts of climate change, enhance adaptive capacity, and increase access to essential social services, particularly in education and health, while also prioritizing employment and food security. On the other hand, global debt accumulation has reached unprecedented levels, with debt service payments in developing countries exceeding the amounts borrowed, further constraining the budgetary space needed to implement sustainable development goals. Mongolia fully supports the international community's efforts to not only ensure debt sustainability, but also fundamentally reform the international financial architecture under the initiative outlined in the UNSG's report, Our Common Agenda. Distinguished delegates, in the early years of the 21st century, ideological conflicts that divided the world became history, while traditional military threats receded and not traditional threats such as climate change, pandemics, terrorism, cybercrime, and refugees gained increasing attention. However, this situation has changed drastically in the recent years, with traditional threats resurfacing and negatively impacting international security and sustainable development. In other words, the overlap and expanding scope of traditional and non-traditional threats requires countries around the world to pay special attention and strengthen their collaborative efforts. In particular, global warming and climate change have transcended natural and economic boundaries, exacerbating sensitive social issues and disputes over resources and triggering migration that bring numerous direct and indirect dangers and risks. If this situation continues, humanity will face not just a choice between development or stagnation, but rather a choice between existence and non-existence. Therefore, we must carefully assess the situation and recognize the need for smart solutions based on the advancement of our era, as well as implementation of new technologies, and share good practices while collaborating to overcome challenges posed by climate change. As descendants of nomads, we Mongols have preserved and honored our unique cultural heritage and traditions to this day. The origin of our nomadic civilization is, in fact, the philosophy of green development, which emphasizes caring for and protecting nature while responsibly utilizing its benefits. This indicates that we have substantial traditional wisdom and initiatives regarding the future of green development, thus in line with the goals of the Sustainable Development, as well as Vision 2050 long-term development policy of Mongolia has successfully been implementing national movements and programs such as Building Trees, Food Security and Safety, Healthy Mongolia, and Digital Mongolia. These initiatives represent our contributions at both international and regional levels in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm also pleased to announce that Mongolia is actively working to implement the resolution adopted by the UNGA, declaring the 2026 as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. Furthermore, we are also preparing to host the 17th conference of the parties to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification in Ulaanbaatar in 2026. I'm confident that the international community and member states will support and collaborate with us in these efforts. Mr. President, Mongolia, as a landlocked country with its unique location on the Central Asian Plateau and extreme weather conditions, has consistently paid particular attention to the issues of countries in similar special situations. We have already collaborated with them to safeguard our interests and make tangible contributions to amplify our voices on the global stage. Mongolia and Austria co-chaired the preparatory committee for the third United Nations Conference on LLDCs for 2023-2024 and successfully facilitated discussions on the draft outcome document among member states. We're pleased that the draft of the action program to be adopted at the upcoming conference in Botswana next December includes innovative content outlining specific goals and measures to guide the development of LLDCs over the next decade. Therefore, we urge all LLDCs, transit countries, and all UN member states and development partners to engage at the highest level in the third conference on LLDCs and to contribute creatively to discussions for the successful implementation of the program of action. Mr. President, at the Fourth World Conference on Women, held in Beijing in 1995, it was proclaimed that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, setting forth the significant goals of eliminating barriers to gender equality on the global stage. We Mongols have a long-lasting culture and tradition of honoring and respecting women with a history of Mongol queens and women who played crucial roles in governance and social affairs throughout our nation's history. This rich traditional and cultural heritage have continued to evolve, positioning Mongolia as one of the leaders in promoting gender equality in Asia. In its first constitution, Mongolia became the first country in Asia to safeguard guarantee equal rights for women, including the rights to vote and to be elected. This year we celebrate the centennial anniversary of the establishment of the National Organization for Women, the Mongolian Women's Federation. As we approach this historic anniversary in 2023, we have implemented legal policy reform designed to enhance women participation in both social and political decision-making level. As a result, in the recent parliamentary election, 25.4% of elected members were women, exceeding the average rate of 21.2% in Asia. Moreover, in August this year, our country successfully hosted the World Women's Forum under the theme Towards a Green Future in Ulaanbaatar in collaboration with the United Nations. This forum brought together women leaders in government, from governments, international organizations, and influential representatives from diverse sectors, social, economic, and cultural, across 5 continents. They proposed numerous creative initiatives to enhance women's role and contributions toward achieving sustainable development goals, including economics, environment, climate change, food security, education, sports, culture, and the arts. I'm pleased to highlight that the Ulaanbaatar Declaration towards a Sustainable Future was adopted as the forum's outcome document. Building on the momentum of the World Women's Forum, Mongolia will continue to actively promote gender equality and the empowerment of women. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the General Assembly of the United Nations is the most important and honorable podium for amplifying the voice of ideas and aspirations for international peace and security, well-being and development of humanity. Mongolia has consistently supported the efforts of member states to reform the UN Security Council into a more equitable, accessible, transparent, effective, democratic, and responsible system. We also strongly advocate for further strengthening the United Nations' central role and coordination in global affairs. Our country believes that any international challenges and misunderstandings should be addressed through mutual understanding, trust, respect, and dialogue, and resolved within the framework of international legal norms. Therefore, I call on you, heads of states, governments, and distinguished delegates, to demonstrate exceptional leadership and make meaningful contributions to strengthen trust, mutual respect, and cooperation among the nations of the world, and the crucial pursuit of global peace, security, sustainable development, and the well-being of humanity. May the eternal blue sky bless us with peace throughout the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Mongolia. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Wavel Ramkalawan, President of the Republic of Seychelles. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like first of all to extend my words of congratulations to Ambassador Yang on your election as President of the General Assembly for this 69th session. I wish also to thank Ambassador Francis for his diligent leadership during the 78th session. Mr. President, as the highest representatives of the peoples of the world, we meet every year in this institution which promises to deliver peace, progress, and prosperity for all. We must be frank in our assessment of what we are doing for the people that we represent and their interests that we serve. For my people of the Seychelles, we must be critical of our approach to the challenges of today and plan for the challenges of tomorrow. The world is less secure than even just 1 year ago. Where we hoped that existing conflicts could be resolved, we find ourselves in a situation more tense and precarious. Flames stoked by competition and distrust threaten to engulf those who have no part in these conflicts, leaving us gripped by a fearful atmosphere of instability exacerbated by the worry of expanded warfare. We are in danger of losing sight of the values that bring us together, that transcend borders and cultures, that are understood in all languages and present in all ideologies. We must revert to our foundational principles of dialogue and cooperation. Without a stable foundation, we cannot build our vision of a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. Our focus is diverted from the challenges requiring our urgent and undivided attention, challenges affecting the core of people's lives and equally requiring solutions with people at their center. The climate crisis, ending poverty and hunger, ensuring that all have the indisputable right to a decent and dignified life. Our people have entrusted us to work together to find solutions. Mr. President, 79 years ago, the permanent members of the Security Council conferred upon themselves the great responsibility of ensuring international peace and security, to cooperate in good faith to save future generations from transgressions of the past. With this great responsibility comes the expectation that gross violations of the UN Charter be dealt with resolutely and impartially. We place our trust in them to act in the common interest to prevent conflict and preserve human dignity. The consequences of conflict are felt beyond the direct and intolerable suffering of victims in war zones and those displaced by fighting. In such an interconnected world, we are all subjected to inflationary pressures, elevated commodity and energy prices, and other disruptive effects. Widened and prolonged conflict risks affecting smaller states like Seychelles, trying not to get caught in the crossfire. It is not our intention to lecture the world powers, nor attempt to prescribe solutions to complex issues. We simply wish to remind you of your duty and be reassured that geopolitics will not supersede human rights and international law. Since its formation in 1946, the Security Council has remained largely unchanged. Most of Africa was under colonial rule then. Seychelles joins the call for the UN and the Security Council to deliver the reform being appealed for by so many, with the objective not to hinder its work, but to bring inclusivity and perspective. It is time to correct one of the many injustices to which Africa has been subjected. Permanent membership of the world's primary peacekeeping institution is a necessity. The consideration by the Council of critical issues, such as sea level rise brought by Malta last year, and the broader climate security nexus, has proven that it is capable of reflecting new realities. The proposal of the United States to include a rotating seat for small island developing states is a welcome and progressive one. Mr. President, climate change remains the foremost challenge facing humanity, and failure to address its effects will devastate current and future generations. As a small island state, Seychelles understands what it means to be vulnerable, a vulnerability that cannot be ignored in the future we see for ourselves. We are on the front lines of the climate crisis, which poses irreversible threats to our people, our economy, and our way of life. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and the degradation of our oceans are stark reminders of the urgent need for global action on climate change. We have all made commitments, pledges, and promises to achieve large-scale reductions of emissions, to keep the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, to boost adaptation, to deal with extreme weather disasters, and build resilience to address future impacts. But words are nothing without deeds, and we have to act urgently, in unity, to make the necessary transition to a more sustainable future. It is a choice, conscious and intentional, to continue down this path and decide that business as usual in pursuit of short-term goals is acceptable. Mr. President, world military expenditure has increased for the 10th consecutive year, reaching $2.5 trillion in 2023. This makes even the highest estimates of the funds, $100 billion needed for loss and damage, seem modest and insignificant. This is a worrying reflection of the world's priorities. It is unfair for SIDS to suffer the consequences of these choices. We simply do not have the means to cope with the disastrous effects of climate change. Here I want to thank those who have contributed to the Loss and Damage Fund. The pledges made following COP28 should not be mere attempts to pacify us who have been calling for remediation. We hope to take it as a token of ongoing commitment and continued action given the expected rise in costs of dealing with climate change. As the Secretary General said yesterday, those who shoulder the blame should foot the bill. The international community cannot hope to advance sustainable development when some race ahead while others are left to struggle. No one should be left behind, lest we forsake future generations to a bleaker world. The obligations outlined in the Paris Agreement are the lifelines that give us a chance if all states did their utmost to adhere to them. Our reliance on fossil fuels is unsustainable and detrimental. We must accelerate energy transition towards renewables and mobilize investment in the technology and infrastructure to give us any prospect of real energy security. Seychelles' focus remains on nature-based solutions to combat climate change while ensuring economic sustainability and environmental preservation. Our blue bonds demonstrate the potential to harness capital markets for financing the sustainable use of marine resources. Mr. President, ambitious and innovative strategies of securing long-term economic development are futile without finance that is accessible and sustainable. The average debt to GDP ratio in SIDS exceeds 70%. It is crippling and impedes our development by diverting critical resources away from where they are most needed in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Our vulnerabilities have been expounded, yet our borrowing costs remain high. Instead of concessions, we are penalized for our vulnerability. It is time to move beyond discussion and implement real reforms in the international financial system to address the preclusion of some vulnerable countries, regardless of income status, from opportunities to meet development needs. We must also recognize the humanitarian consequences of economic policies. Our work in the multilateral system is undermined by unilateral coercive measures that are intended to leave economies crippled and governments unable to advance dignity for their own people. Mr. President, the multilateral system remains our best hope for addressing the challenges we face. As a small state, Seychelles believes in the United Nations, for we fear of a reality with no alternative. In a world more interconnected than ever, multilateralism is the network that links our shared values to achieve the vision that we have for our world, one that is defined by our common interests and not by our differences. We are here to solve problems, not exacerbate them, to listen and not to dismiss. We put our faith in this institution because we must prove to the world that we can work for it. But it is up to us to make it work. In 2023, we adopted the BBNJ agreement, and this year, Seychelles became the 4th state and the first in Africa to ratify it. We urge other countries to hasten its ratification so as not to delay its entry into force. This year's 4th SIDS conference in Antigua and Barbuda shone a timely light on the challenges that we face in a global economic landscape for which we are ill-equipped to navigate. The Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SEEDS provides the blueprint for action over the next decade, and we call on the international community to commit to its implementation. The MVI resolution adopted here last month also represents a triumph of the multilateral system to consider new approaches to complex and evolving issues. Its data and findings deliver the empirical grounding for what we know to be true, that a single-layered approach to development is no longer accurate nor adequate. A better understanding of precisely these multidimensional vulnerabilities will be crucial for the decisions that we take, and more importantly, those taken on our behalf. The Pact for the Future, just adopted, should rightly usher in a new era of engagement based on mutual interest and mutual respect. We must use it to bridge divisions between nations on critical issues of human rights, gender equality, and the rule of law. One that accelerates the implementation of the SDGs and shapes the international financial system more fairly. One that adapts responses to global crisis in a more coordinated way, and one that restores peace with a promise to preserving it in the future. For Seychelles, the Declaration on Future Generations should signal our commitment to safeguarding the rights of all people who will be born by the end of this century, most of whom in developing countries. People who should not be born into hardship. We must envision a world where survival is not a struggle, a world that ensures everyone's rights to prosperity. Basic rights should not be difficult to provide. Mr. President, I firmly believe that these are the foundations on which our cooperation and progress should be built, the things that our people need the most, and what should guide us to building a world that is more secure and sustainable. Let us strive to be the architects of a world where no one is left behind. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Seychelles. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Peter Pavel, President of the Czech Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a true honor for me to address you today. Much to my regret, since the last time we met here 1 year ago, the world has not become any safer. On the contrary. To start with, let me recall that the United Nations was created to save humanity from the scourge of war and destruction, and to promote peace, justice, and better quality of life for all humankind. Together, we have managed to build a global system of rules and cooperation with the ambition to advance security and human rights instead of conflict and suffering. Fostering economic development instead of overlooking mass destruction. Aligned around the UN Charter, we have subscribed not to repeat the mistakes and disasters of the past. Unfortunately, we still do. The world and its citizens need and deserve an effective UN that can respond quickly when needed and deliver better on our shared global commitments. Without a functioning multilateral system, alternative and exclusive structures would lead to more fragmentation and less predictability. It is our duty as national and global leaders to find common solutions to the most pressing problems before they get out of hand. Finding a compromise is never easy. It requires time and patience. Only if we realize that together we can achieve much more than when antagonized, can we make our nations and the United Nations truly united behind common goals. A comprehensive reform of the UN Security Council is long overdue. Making the Council more effective, inclusive, accountable, and better reflecting today's realities by strengthening the voice of underrepresented regions is crucially needed. In the face of unjust and unprovoked Russian war against Ukraine, we must realize that Security Council membership is not a carte blanche. No one has the right to abuse power and bully other members of the international community without sanctions. Together, we must exercise more pressure on Russia to end its unjust and brutal war. The Peace Summit in Switzerland clearly confirmed that peace in Ukraine must be based on international law and principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The cynical nature of Russia's policy and its disinterest in genuine peace talks has global consequences. These include impairing nuclear safety, diminishing food and energy security, and damaging rules-based international order. Czechia calls on those who have not yet supported our common effort to evaluate the possibility of signing the joint declaration agreed at the Peace Summit in Switzerland. So far, many with the aspiration to become respected regional or global actors have these. Some of you might think that Russia's actions against Ukraine are just another regional conflict and both sides need to go halfway. But there is no such thing as just a regional conflict. Conflicts in one part of the world cause food insecurity and create refugee waves in other. With globalization, our security and prosperity starts way beyond our own borders. Being fully aware of that, Czechia is committed not only to security of Europe, but also in Middle East, Africa, and elsewhere. I applaud the fact that many nations, including African, spare no effort to achieve and safeguard peace and security in their own regions and far beyond. Czechia will continue to engage with African countries and closely listen to their views and needs. I believe that despite political differences, together we can create mutually beneficial partnerships based on the principle of equality, mutual respect, and without any historical burden or future material demands. Africa is a continent with huge economic potential, which is waiting to be unlocked. We want to see Africa flourish, enhance its capabilities, and create opportunities and jobs for young people. The last topic I want to touch upon is cybersecurity and technology. With progressing digital transformation and our increasing reliance on advanced technology, the gravity and scale of cyber threats are increasing and respect no borders. Cyber espionage and attacks against our hospitals, media, infrastructure, national institutions and businesses aim to destabilize our democratic system and undermine its principles. Just as offline, we cannot allow the cyberspace to become a lawless criminal world. The agreed framework of responsible behavior of states in cyberspace should guide us in our effort to strive for a safer online world. The security of cyberspace will depend on the capacities and effort of all responsible states to enhance their own cyber capabilities. Czechia is taking its commitment to the protection of global cyberspace security very seriously. We will continue providing assistance to our partners in Africa, Asia, and South America so that together we can improve our resilience and to protect our citizens even better. Foreign interference and disinformation continue to present a challenge with a serious impact on democracy, security, and the rules-based international order. With rapid development of new technologies, protection and promotion of human rights continue to be vital for our societies. Emerging technologies will have an undisputable influence on the nature of our future conflicts, but also on peace. It is our duty to ensure that innovations, including artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, biotech, or quantum computing, fully conform to our ethical and human rights standards. Last year, Czechia, together with Mexico, the Maldives, the Netherlands, and South Africa, submitted a resolution on human rights in the context of digital technologies. Furthermore, last month, during the GlobeSec Security Forum, I sat down with top managers of global tech companies at the Prague Geotech Summit. I was glad to hear that they are fully aware of their responsibility and fully committed to contribute to the resilience of democracy. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the challenges we are facing are global, and we can only succeed if we fully commit ourselves to collective action and more cooperation. The quality of our governance will be judged by our actions and whether we leave this world in a better condition for future generations. I would like to thank everyone who is tirelessly working to make our planet a safer and more secure place for all. That is what really matters. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Czech Republic. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you very much. Dear leaders, Your Excellencies, today I want to tell you about a day that has already passed and a day that must never come. On the night of March 4th, 2022, I received one of the most terrifying reports since the beginning of a full-scale Russian invasion against Ukraine. The report was about Russian tanks firing directly at the buildings of our Ukrainian nuclear power plant, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest one in Europe, 6 nuclear reactors. The Russian army stormed this facility just as brutally as any other during this war, without thinking about the consequences, possibly disastrous. This was one of the most horrifying moments of the war, when no one could know how Russian strikes on the nuclear facility would end, and everyone in Ukraine was reminded of what Chernobyl means. Now, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remains occupied by Russian forces, unfortunately, and it's at risk of a nuclear incident. This is the major source of radiation danger in Europe, possibly in the world. That's why, in the peace formula I presented, the first point is about nuclear safety. In Ukraine, we know exactly what we are dealing with. And I want to thank you, the General Assembly members, for adopting a resolution in July this year on the safety of nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Most in the world understand what's at stake. The General Assembly demanded that Russia return control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to Ukraine. Only then real nuclear security will return to Europe and the world. And now about the day that must never come. Since Russia can't defeat our people's resistance on the battlefield, Putin is looking for other ways to break the Ukrainian spirit. One of his methods is targeting our energy infrastructure. And these are deliberate Russian attacks on our power plants and the entire energy grid. As of today, Russia has destroyed all our thermal power plants and a large part of our hydroelectric capacity. This is how Putin is preparing for winter, hoping to torment millions of Ukrainians, ordinary families, women, children, ordinary towns, ordinary villages. Putin wants to leave them in the dark and cold this winter, forcing Ukraine to suffer and surrender. Just imagine, please, your country with 80% of its energy system gone, with such a destroyed part of the system. What kind of life would that be? Recently, I received yet another alarming report from our intelligence. Now Putin does seem to be planning attacks on our nuclear power plants and the infrastructure, aiming to disconnect the plants from the power grid. With the help of satellites, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, satellites of other countries. Russia is getting images and detailed information about the infrastructure of our nuclear power plants. But what does this really threaten? Any missile or drone strike, any critical incident in the energy system could lead to a nuclear disaster. A day like that must never come. And Moscow needs to understand this, and this depends in part on your determination to put pressure on the aggressor. These are nuclear power plants. They must be safe. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago in the fall of 2022, I proposed a comprehensive strategy to end the war and to ensure security, and I presented the peace formula at a highly inclusive political platform for world leaders, the G20 summit in Indonesia, representing billions of citizens from all parts of the globe. And it's important for us that all these people can understand us, understand that Ukraine wants to end this war more than anyone in the world. War always poses a threat to many. You all see in the media and read in reports what is happening in Ukraine because of Russia's war. It's something many are imagining happening to themselves. And yes, the smoke from fires in war-torn cities can reach other countries. And if, God forbid, Russia causes a nuclear disaster at one of our nuclear power plants, radiation will not respect state borders. And unfortunately, various nations could feel the devastating effects. Many are concerned, but the deepest understanding of war is always found in the home it destroys. It's the Ukrainian people who feel the full pain of this war. It's Ukrainian children who are learning to distinguish the sounds of different types of artillery and drones because of Russia's war. It's our people who are forcefully separated by occupation because Putin decided he could do whatever he wants. It's our heroic soldiers who are giving their lives to defend our country from invaders trying to steal our land. That's why we say, rightfully so, there can be no just peace without Ukraine. And I thank every leader, every country that supports us in this, that understands us, that sees how Russia, a country more than 20 times larger than Ukraine in territory, still wants even more land, which is insane, and is seizing it day by day while wanting to destroy its neighbor. And Russia found very special bodies for that: North Korea and Iran, telling choice of friends. And now every neighbor of Russia in Europe and Central Asia feels that the war could come to them as well, and just think what kind of losses that would mean for the world. And I thank nearly 100 nations and international organizations that have supported the peace formula. It's truly a global community: Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, North America, the Pacific region, all united by the peace formula. And I am glad that the first peace summit was so reminding of the UN General Assembly. Everyone was equal. All nations that participated in the peace summit, large and small, no veto right, no blocking authority, those that have been independent for ages and those that have only recently gained independence, those that have gone through wars themselves, and those accustomed to peace, all were equal. That is what Russia hates the most and cannot control. That's why Russia says the peace formula doesn't suit it. Here at the UN, I've already met with leaders from India, Guatemala, Japan and Italy, Turkey and Finland, Canada, Paraguay, Slovenia, Germany and others, and my meetings will continue. These are different, absolutely, parts of the world and various political waves of life, but they share the same understanding. Peace is needed, and it must be a real, just peace. Unfortunately, at the UN, it's impossible to truly and fairly resolve matters of war and peace because too much depends in the Security Council on the veto power. When the aggressor exercises veto power, the UN is powerless to stop the war, but the peace formula can. Once again, there is no veto power in it. That's why it's the best opportunity for peace. Everyone is equal, and it's effective and comprehensive. When some propose alternatives, half-hearted settlement plans, so-called sets of principles, it not only ignores the interests and suffering of Ukrainians, who are affected by the war the most, it not only ignores reality, but also gives Putin the political space to continue the war and pressure the world to bring more nations under control. Any parallel or alternative attempts to seek peace are, in fact, efforts to achieve a lull instead of an end to the war. As a global initiative, the peace formula has already existed for 2 years, and maybe somebody wants a Nobel Prize for their political biography for frozen truths instead of real peace, but the only prizes Putin will give you in return are more suffering and disasters. We must restore nuclear safety. Energy must stop being used as a weapon. We must ensure food security. We need to bring home all our captured soldiers and civilians forcibly deported to Russia. We must uphold the UN Charter and guarantee our right, Ukraine's right to territorial integrity and sovereignty, just as we do for any other nation. We need to withdraw the Russian occupiers, which will bring an end to the hostilities in Ukraine, and we must hold those responsible for war crimes accountable. We need to prevent ecocide and stop the destruction of nature caused by the war. And we must not allow a second or third phase of this Russian invasion. And we need to make it clear the war is over. This is the peace formula. What part of this could be unacceptable to anyone who upholds the UN Charter? If someone in the world seeks alternatives to any of these points or tries to ignore any of them, it likely means they themselves want to do a part of what Putin is doing. The point they ignore reveals the desire they're hiding. And when the Chinese-Brazilian duo tries to grow into a choir of voices, with someone in Europe, with someone in Africa saying something alternative to a full and just peace, the question arises, what is the true interest? Everyone must understand you will not boost your power at Ukraine's expense. And the world has already been through colonial wars and conspiracies of great powers at the expense of those who are smaller. Every country, including China, Brazil, European nations, African nations, Middle East, all understand why this must remain in the past. And Ukrainians will never accept why anyone in the world believes that such a brutal colonial past, which suits no one today, can be imposed on Ukraine now instead of a normal, peaceful life. I want peace for my people, real peace and just peace. And I'm asking for your support from all nations of the world. We do not divide the world. I ask the same of you, do not divide the world. Be united nations. And that will bring us peace. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Ukraine.